Yeah, of course, Brazil, though, is just focused on the prosecution that's underway of the former leader there. But let me ask you about what's happening on Capitol Hill.
Hold on. Let's also remember, they're also a member of BRICS, this alliance with communist China. And I think what's coming to a head here is that some countries are going to have to make a decision now. Are you going to align yourself by way of trade with the United States of America, or are you going to be with a communist dictatorial regime that has concentration camps?
You see what he slipped in right there at the end about the concentration camps that China has? CNN will not cover that. She may be pretty, but man, is she annoying. Because when you're a Republican like this senator, no matter the good facts you point out, Kaitlan over here is going to try to find a little hole in your argument and never admit some of the good, logical, and even controversial things you bring up. And no matter what she tried to do, even if it was putting words in his mouth, this guy stayed calm and cool as the other side of the pillow, even if sometimes he was deferring a little too much to Daddy Trump. It's SeanDaniel here, filming from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. If you're in South Dakota, let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoy watching Kaitlan Collins get served by some Republicans, consider hitting that subscribe button. I will put out her good interviews every chance I get.
Tonight, a report card on the economy shows inflation rising to its highest level in months. The rate of inflation rising to 2.7% in June, which is the highest since February. Here's how President Trump responded to those new numbers today.
There was very little inflation, as you know. The numbers were very good, very much inside the margin. So we've had no inflation. All we have is we're making a fortune.
Here's what retailers and consumers have been seeing, though, despite what you heard from the president there. A dozen eggs are 39% more expensive than last year. A pound of coffee up 30%. Sliced bacon, a gallon of milk, a pound of fresh whole chicken also up. And items with high exposure to the president's tariffs policies are rising. We saw appliance prices go up 1.9% in June. That is the highest jump that we've seen in that since August of 2020. And the president's 50% tariffs on steel and aluminum were extended to include consumer appliances last month. Also, toy prices rising for the second month in a row as the United States imports about 80% of toys that we get here from China. My source tonight is Republican Senator Eric Schmidt of Missouri. And Senator, it's great to have you here joining us tonight from Capitol Hill. I wonder, when you look at these new numbers, do they give you any pause on the president's tariff strategy?
No, I think what was excluded from the numbers, you've got fuel prices down, you've got gas prices down, you've got fuel commodities down, you've got transportation costs down. So if you actually take the core inflation numbers, which is a probably more steady indicator of the trajectory, the core inflation was actually down from month to month. But I mean, you're talking about numbers that are pretty close. I'm confident that what's happening right now, President Trump inherited an economy that the election cycle last year was dominated by two issues. High inflation, of course, mass migration that President Trump is tackling both of those. And you look at the record investment, Kaitlan, that you see in this country right now, $5 trillion. Apple just made another $500 million investment on critical minerals. We're getting manufacturing back. President Trump is tackling these bad trade deals that have saddled this country for at least a couple of generations now since the end of the Cold War. And then you've got now the big, beautiful bill. You've got certainty on tax policy. You're not going to have a $4 trillion tax increase, and you're also going to have no tax on tips, no tax on overtime. So I think when you've got that kind of runway for President Trump's agenda, you're going to see growth like you saw in the first term.
So you're not worried that if in 2 weeks, on August 1st, that deadline he's been teasing, he puts more tariffs in place, that we could see these inflation numbers continue to go up in the next critical months that everyone's going to be watching?
Well, it just didn't happen when we had tariffs in President Trump's first term. There was a lot of conjecture about whether or not those tariffs were going to cause inflation. It just didn't happen. You've seen actually record dollars into the Treasury. Now you saw a surplus, anticipating, $300 billion a year in revenue from essentially that 10% tariff. So I think that really this is about rebalancing the trade imbalance that we've had for such a long time in this country, and getting countries to the table to drop not just their tariffs, Kaitlan, but all these other trade barriers that exist. And with China is a whole different category with their IP theft and a lot of the dumping that they do. But you're seeing our allies especially come to the table now. They want to negotiate with President Trump, and I think when we do that, we're going to be much better off. And all that's happening at one time. So we're in the first 7 months of the administration.
Yeah.
You've got big, beautiful bill, you've got rescissions, you've got the trade deals, you've got the investment. There's enough runway for that to play out.
And of course, the tariffs, though, that we saw in the first term were much more targeted than the ones that we're seeing now. So that is why the questions about inflation are different here. But one thing I want to ask you about is today I was asking the president about his recent threat on Brazil and justifying the tariffs against Brazil. Obviously, as you know, the United States has a $7.4 billion trade surplus with that country. This is what he told me.
How do you justify putting tariffs on Brazil if they have a surplus with the United States?
We are doing it because I'm able to do it. Nobody else would be able to do it.
Is that enough for a legal justification, in your view, not liking what a country's judicial system is doing?
Well, the president has that authority, absolutely. The question is whether or not that's actually going to happen or not. I think President Trump has been very adept at bringing people to the table on a whole host of issues because nobody's been willing to wield, trade policy in a way that President Trump has. The fact of the matter, Caitlin, is we have been ripped off for a very, very long time. And I think rebalancing this equation is very important. In my home state of Missouri, we saw the loss of those manufacturing jobs. You saw people imported into this country who were undercutting wages. And for the first time now, we've got a president that cares about that. America isn't some, strip mall with an airport. It's our home. And so he's fighting for working class families. And I think, again, this negotiation that happens with a bunch of countries on a bunch of different, different landscape, we're going to be better off for it.
Yeah, of course, Brazil, though, is just focused on the prosecution that's underway of the former leader there. But let me ask you about what's happening on Capitol Hill.
Hold on. Let's also remember, they're also a member of BRICS, this alliance with communist China. And I think what's coming to a head here is that some countries are going to have to make a decision now. Are you going to align yourself by way of trade with the United States of America, or are you going to be with a communist dictatorial regime that has concentration camps?
He's made clear it's about Bolsonaro, and he repeated that today. He brought it up today, asking about how his trial was going.
You see what he slipped in right there at the end about the concentration camps that China has against religious groups, against different people that they don't like?
Or are you going to be with a communist dictatorial regime that has concentration camps?
CNN will not cover that, but they will cover to no end the standards in the ICE detention centers and how they're inhumane and how they're bad. But Kaitlan Collins and CNN will not touch on China. At least I have never heard them touch on that, the human rights violations going on there. So Trump is telling the public media that it's about Bolsonaro and the whole judicial case. But maybe behind the scenes to Brazil, he's telling them, you guys want to keep aligning with China? I'm going to make you pay. Plus you have this weird judicial case that I don't necessarily agree with, the way you're targeting this guy. But maybe that's what he's really saying behind the scenes. Let me know what you guys think down below. Because a lot of you guys were telling me in a previous video about the commie ties that they have with China. And we also know how Trump likes to negotiate, likes to play power moves, doesn't want to expose everything to the public media about what he's really saying behind the scenes. So maybe, to distract everybody, that's what he's putting everyone's attention to, is this case, which maybe he doesn't like, but really the main cause of the way he's going after Brazil is because of their ties to China. And he's telling them that behind the scenes. Maybe he doesn't want to create a big target against China in the public warfare with the media. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think. But it kind of makes sense.
But let me ask you about what's happening on Capitol Hill, because you were leading the efforts to codify DOJ's cuts to the federal government through Congress to make it law. Senator Murkowski and we've seen Senator Susan Collins and Senator Mitch McConnell all voting against moving that package out of committee. The vice president broke the tie. Do you believe ultimately this will get passed despite the concerns we've heard about this?
I do. I think that our conference is very well united on this. I mean, this is $9 billion that really gets at some of the worst of the worst. I mean, DEI trainings in Burma, transgender surgeries, or, sex change operations in Guatemala, $1 million for voter ID in Haiti. There's some irony in that. So all of that crazy stuff, Caitlin, is in this, and then including the $1.1 billion for NPR and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. NPR is an ideologically captured institution at this point, spewing out venom against Republicans at every turn, and so they don't deserve taxpayer dollars. So I think when you put all that stuff in this one package, the $9 billion, which is $90 billion in a 10-year window, we need to get that done, I think, to deliver on behalf of the American people and restore some trust that this stuff isn't going to be wasted.
Well, and obviously we'll see how Republicans handle that, and if you get enough Republican support to get that passed up on Capitol Hill. I want to ask you about the other thing that Republicans have been talking about today on Capitol Hill, the Jeffrey Epstein files. I know obviously a lot of your colleagues have been asked about this. Do you personally believe, in your view, that the Attorney General Pam Bondi is handling this in the right way?
I have a lot of faith in Pam Bondi, Kash Patel, and Dan Bongino, and especially President Trump. And as a former prosecutor, my job before this was Attorney General. It's really difficult to know exactly what they were looking at, right? To really opine about whether or not there was a charging decision to be made. And so, but again, I think that President Trump's got a great team taking a look at this.
Well, you yourself were in the running to be Attorney General. You took yourself out of contention during the transition, for those who don't remember. I just asked because you posted, for example, on February 26th, a siren emoji, and you wrote Epstein logs to be released tomorrow. Thanks, Pam Bondi. What was released, the right-wing influencers that were given it said it was nothing new. They were very upset about it. Do you believe enough information has been shared on this matter?
Look, I mean, people are rightfully curious about this. I know I am, still am, of course. But when you're a prosecutor and you're looking at information, sensitive information that, you know, whether you have enough evidence or not to move forward, that's a different equation than sort of political speculation that's happening right now.
So that sounds like you don't think more should be released.
Well, I don't know. Again, I don't know what she's looking at, what can be released. If something can be released, I'd love to see it. But again, when you're conducting a criminal investigation, it's a little bit different kind of scenario. So again, not knowing what she's looking at, it's just difficult to opine. And sometimes I think the best answer here is I just don't know.
Are you surprised by how upset the MAGA base has been over this?
No, I think that people feel like the government has lied to them on multiple occasions before. I certainly understand that. And in many ways, this election cycle was about the disruptors versus the establishment. So I understand the sentiment, but that doesn't have, you know, necessarily with this individual circumstance as far as what Pam Bondi was looking at or what the FBI was looking at, whether or not there's enough evidence to move forward. I just don't know that.
Okay, but you think if it can be released, it should be released. Senator Eric Schmidt, thank you for joining us tonight. Thanks for your time.
Anytime.
See, Kaitlan's slick. She does a good job throwing in the last word and recapping what he said, or what she tries to paint as what he said. But what she said there was accurate. I think Senator Eric Schmidt over here gave one of the best answers we've heard, coming from a position of authority and respect for the duty required to be an attorney general. It is very easy for social media people, podcast people, people on news desks to share about how Pam Bondi should have done this, Pam Bondi should have done that. It's even easy for me and you to do that. But we don't really understand, one, how many things are on the desk of somebody that's, one, just an attorney. Secondly, maybe a high-ranking attorney for a state of the USA. I don't know if that's called Attorney General, what it's called. But let alone what it was required and the workload and the amount of cases and big decisions required for the Attorney General of the USA. And this guy, if he was in the running for it, he has some experience or knowledge based on it. And he has the wherewithal to say, hey, I don't know what's in the files. I don't know what she has. I can't comment on what she should or shouldn't release. There's certain decisions made that I'm not privy to. And that's respectful. You got to respect that. Now, me and you can still think about what all the things Pam Bondi, Dan Bongino, Kash Patel, everyone has said about this, and then how the whole thing is played out. We can think and make reasonable conclusions about the power struggle, about the expose, about the dark forces and the manipulations and pressures that are going on possibly to cause this list to not be released, which I think that big decision lands on President Trump's shoulders. I don't think Pam Bondi's acting as a free agent on her own, whether or not to release this stuff. We can still think about that and observe. But what this guy said makes a lot of sense, and I think we have to take a step back to really try to, even though we don't understand, try to put ourselves in her shoes with the amount of things she has going on. It's itsSeanDaniel here. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy, consider liking or subscribing for more. And if you want to see a fiery debate between CNN's Van Jones and our main man, Scotty Boy Scott Jennings, check out this video right here. They get into it, and it has me wondering who actually won that debate. See you in the next one.